Welcome to the book talk with Nicolai Tillisch, author of the new book, Return on Ambition. We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, as well as over Zoom. You have the opportunity to chat with Nicolai and myself during this book talk. It's a great privilege to welcome Nicolai Tillisch. As during my 20 years of working with people development, I have often felt that I had the chance, I've often had the chance to talk to people about their ambition. And I have met many ambitious people in life, but often I felt that I needed a better toolbox or framework to guide people. So when I read your new book, Nicolai, I knew that this will help a great amount of people, including myself, in getting a better return on ambition. My name is Jesper Nytorp Bergman, and I have the privilege to be the director of ABT Business School and your host for this book talk. The two authors, Nicolai Nielsen and Nicolai Tillisch, addresses ambition this way. Your ambitions shape the way you work and the way you treat your loved ones and yourself. Ambition can be driven by a hunger for power, fame, and fortune, or it can be motivated by a more altruistic aspiration to make the world a better place. Often it's a combination of both. So the authors poses these questions to you. How can I make sure that I get the most positive return on ambition? What can I do to manage this investment better? And what are the efforts I'm putting into my ambitions? At all worth the time that I'm spending, or could I accomplish my goals differently or with a more efficient use of my energy? So these are great questions, Nicolai. And Nicolai will start this book talk by giving an overview of the book. And after that, we'll dive into a Q&A session. Nicolai will also ask you some questions along the way. And hopefully you're ready for some reflections as we go along. So thank you very much for joining us, Nicolai. And I hope the presentation works your end. And you just unmute, and then we should be ready to get going.
Thank you so much, Jesper. I've looked very much forward to today, and I've really enjoyed our collaboration during the presentation. So welcome, everyone. We are so fortunate to have really bad weather today. So it's a very good day to have an online session like this. And my ambition for this session is really that each of you take one thing home that you can use to increase your return on ambition. And it's a little bit about how can you get more success and fulfillment in life with your current effort, or achieve the same as you do today and the same level of achievement, but with less effort and less sacrifice. So that's really what it's all about. Let me just give you an overview of the talk. So Jesper has given us a good idea, but if we just, what I will talk about first is the nature of ambition. And one of the findings of Nicolai, it's quite funny, we are both called Nicolai. Nicolai and I actually had as a big insight was that a lot of people don't reflect that much on their ambition. So let's start by looking at what is ambition, what is the nature of ambition. And then we will move on and look at what we call the return on ambition equation. Then I will talk about what helps and hinders. And here we have come up with the notion of frenemies, which are basically our strengths that helps us, but also end up often hindering us when we really try to do things differently and move on in life. And then finally, briefly, I'll give you an example from the toolbox that we have also developed for the book. And then there will be time for questions. And I will also ask you questions along the way, so we're at least a little bit interactive here. So if we start out, Nicolai and I defined ambition the following way. So ambition is a powerful yearning and drive to attain a future state that is different from today and challenging to reach. And this is clearly a stretch compared to, you can say, the dictionary, but we feel that the word ambition is allowed to stretch a little bit. But the point here is we talk about something that's very broad. You could replace the word ambition with dream or aspirations or objectives. I know that in some cultures, there's a little bit caution of being too ambitious. I've also heard stories about in certain families to be too ambitious was a bad thing. So of course, there are a lot associated with this concept, but this is how we define it. And we were pretty methodic when we approached this. So we have worked on the book for several years, actually. And we went through all existing research. We did a big survey of ambitious people around the world. We really wanted to be very diverse. And also we have done a number of in-depth interviews with people we carefully selected. So let me share a few findings. And the first couple of findings are a little bit scary, actually. So what we found in our survey was that 59% of the people who describe themselves as being ambitious, that they actually struggle to keep a balance in life. I'll get back to this because this is very much one of the important points in the book. But it's still a finding to have a lot of respect for. Another finding we had is, which I think is to some extent more scary, is that 43% of the ambitious people basically shared that they were currently doubting whether the effort they were putting into pursuing their ambition would pay off. And that's pretty scary. It's about half. And it's just one moment in time. Another thing, and I only have 2 slides on this, so I'm not trying to scare you all off, and then I will be very positive and optimistic and constructive after that. But that is, most of the ambitious people value, see an importance in reflecting, but 4 out of 10 of them also admitted that they don't think they use enough time to reflect on life. What we could also see was that the ones who don't take time to reflect, they are more than double as likely to feel stressed. So clearly something is going on here. So all these scary findings, I'd like to jump into a framework we put together, a very simple one, just to describe a little bit like how people's ambitions are different, because this was another interesting finding, is that ambition comes through very differently in people's lives. And what we actually found necessary was to describe some dimensions, or you can say premises of ambition. So one is specificity. Then we have uniqueness, then we have size, and then we have priority. Let me give you a few examples. So in terms of specificity, we found some people who were ultra precise very early on in life on what they wanted far into the future. So one of the cases we describe is New Zealand's Prime Minister, Ardeen. So she was, when elected, the youngest Prime Minister of a country ever. And if you look at her life story, it's maybe not so surprising, because she went into politics already as a teenager. She became an assistant for an earlier prime minister. She worked her way through the political system from a very early age on, and then basically became that youngest prime minister ever. Another example we found, who is in the complete opposite side of that spectrum, is Trevor Noah, who is a South African comedian who is now, I mean, he took over one of the biggest talk shows in the world, to many people's surprise. But when he talks about his life, he's actually of the belief that dreams can be dangerous. And what have been his guide in life has always been to do what he's doing really, really well. And his ambition was actually to become an IT manager. And as he noted in an interview, that he could potentially have become the world's most funny IT manager. So that's about specificity. I guess you start getting a flavor that there can be big differences. In terms of uniqueness, one of the examples we pulled out is the chef Jamie Oliver. So if you look at his past, it was pretty traditional in the beginning. So he went into a famous restaurant, he worked his way through the kitchen, he got some attention, he made a cookbook, he made a TV show. And that is what a lot of other chefs have done. But then he took on his own trajectory. So what he did was he started doing a TV series that was built around projects that had a social dimension. So he took, you can say, young people who struggled in society and basically trained them into becoming chefs. And he opened a restaurant with them, made a TV series around it, and had that restaurant running for quite a while in London. And later on, he took on the school food in the British schools. And later on, he ended up doing programs about malnutrited areas in the US, where he helped people cook tasty and healthy food. So that's an example of somebody who started out in a relatively kind of generalist way, at least for a chef, but then ended up in a very unique way. In terms of size, one of the people we mentioned is Elon Musk, maybe not surprising, who I mean, is impressively entrepreneurial. In terms of priority, we have a number of people. Of course, there are a lot of examples for people who live completely dedicated to what they are doing and sleep very little, get up very early. And then on the other hand, we had Pharrell Williams, who is not only a musician, but also a designer, an artist, entrepreneur, philanthropist. And Pharrell Williams has never used an alarm clock in his adult life. So there you see like how you can kind of either be very focused on something or be more fluid. So with all this said, I think there should be a basis to reflect a little bit on ambition. And I'd like to ask you the first question today. So in the chat, if you are comfortable in sharing, what are some of the core elements of your ambition? Take a moment to reflect. I think actually the reflection is much more important than the writing, but if you're okay with that, and then put it in so we can just have a little bit of a sense. Yes, but I can see you get more and more serious here because we have no people in the chat yet. So of course the question is whether it's working.
Looking out the window and it's raining, so yeah, just reflecting a lot, you know. So that was my seriousness here.
And again, as I said, the most important thing is you reflect upon this question, because that reflection is one that you then can refer back to as we move further into this.
Maybe we should just say that if you just send in a few comments to the panelists, it's only us that can actually see them and not all people. So just so you're aware. I won't share names, etc.
Yeah. I'm very good at keeping secrets because normally I'm coaching top executives. So it's actually my most significant qualification is I can keep a secret. Good. Why don't we move on? The reflection was much more important than the technology. So what I want to talk about now is the return on ambition equation. And it's super simple as these things should be. So the way we have defined it is return on ambition. And of course, we are playing on the wording of return on investment. So return on ambition is really achievement. So that means what you do in terms of personal and professional goals, plus your growth. And again, there can be many facets of that. And then plus your well-being. And here again, we have a very broad definition of well-being. It can be physical, emotional, social, and also spiritual. So what does this mean? It basically means that when we look at what you get out of your ambitious efforts, then you need to look at all these three elements. And it's reflecting a very important insight we had, and that was that when we saw people who have been consistently successful over time, one of the things they had in common was that they continuously nurtured all these three factors: achievement, growth, and well-being. And what we also found that these three are actually enforcing each other. So if you have high levels of all three, they are enforcing each other. And when we looked into many case examples and also a lot of research, what we could see is, did you suddenly not prioritize one of these three? It could be any of the three. So for a period of time, compromise one of them, sacrificed it. Then what you would typically see after a while, that the two others would drop. And I think that's a very important finding. So let me give you an example. You can work, and I'm sure many of you do, and I've done myself and still do, work incredibly hard and have a very high level of well-being. But the moment where you compromise your personal growth, typically something happens, because after a while, you will struggle to keep the level of well-being and also the level of achievement you have had before. And we did meta studies of existing research, and one of the findings, insights we came across there was that an increasing body of evidence that actually the lack of development is a more significant factor in burnout than hard work itself. So when you sacrifice one of these three, then you will still falls in the three others. And again, when you take these people who just consistently really achieve a lot, they typically also keep growing and prioritize their well-being. So now we didn't have the great success, Jesper and I, with the chat before. So I'd pause a moment and just have you to reflect. When you look at these three, which of them contain the biggest potential for you to increase your return on ambition? Is that the achievement? Are you closer, kind of getting further than you have been before? Or do you have an important goal that you are really striving with at the moment? Or is more the growth that you have been so busy you don't have had time to prioritize your own development? Or is it the well-being? So our book came out here a few months ago, and of course there's been a lot of attention because they're around the well-being element, because with the pandemic, I mean, a lot of people have actually, I mean, they're in a place they have never been before, and really struggle with their well-being. Please keep this in mind. So our point is basically look at all three, and at any given moment in time, you might want to pay a little bit more attention to improving one of them. Then you can always look at one of the others later on. Good.
Nicolai, I just want to point out that there's actually things coming in the chat if you want to.
You can see it because I cannot see it. Brilliant.
All right. Okay.
Oh, there it is. Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you, Jesper. So, so that was the previous question. This is brilliant. Brilliant. In that case, I mean, in that case, what I would love you to do is, if you can put into the chat, then also the answer to the question I just asked here. So of the three factors, achievement, growth, and well-being, which of the three do you see the biggest potential for you to improve your return on ambition? So we already have a few of answers here. So there's achievement here, there's well-being. This is good. Thank you so much. One more achievement. Then we have one more. We have growth. So now we have all three. And here we have one, I suppose, achievement and then growth. Yeah. I mean, it's always good to have potential. What I would like to move into now is the notion of frenemies. And the frenemies is basically what helps and hinder us to achieve what we want to achieve, but also find that balance in life. And here you have the 7 frenemies that we identified, and you can look at them as being the virtues of ambitious people. It basically means that these represent very typical strength of ambitious people. So if we take them one by one, we have competitiveness, we have desire, we have perseverance, we have boldness, we have independence, we have flexibility, and we have convention. So all these 7 have something really positive in them, but what we can also see is that they often are so strong and are so internalized in us that they are also working where it's not helpful. So if I can give you a very personal example, if I should pick one of these frenemies and say that that's really the one that I associate with the strongest, then it would be perseverance. And just to give a little bit of my personal history, I'm actually dyslexic, and Return on Ambition is my 2nd book in English. I've also been contributing significant to 2 Danish books. So I was not meant to be an author. And you can also say, if you look at my career, I'm probably one of the few dyslexic persons who have ever joined McKinsey as a consultant. But around the age of 10, I decided that my struggles with reading and writing shouldn't prohibit me from doing what I wanted to do in life. And I was very determined, and I worked really, really hard in school, and also during high school and later on university. I had to work pretty hard because my reading speed was low, and I was writing slower and also less precise than others. So that's an example. So I would never professionally have gotten to where I am, was it not for the perseverance. So it's clearly my friend. But there's also an enemy side to perseverance. And that means I keep also, even now, when I'm not paying attention to it, I end up working myself way too hard. And that means I can have periods where I work really hard and get exhausted. I've never had what people call a burnout. There's, by the way, also doubt about whether it's a real diagnosis in that sense. But I know the thing about being able to work harder than most other people, but then also have a few days, often around weekends or holidays, where I'm completely exhausted. So that's an example of a frenemy. And again, you can do the same with any of the 7, that you look at their strength, their value, but also how there's a big flip side to them. If I give you another example from the book, we actually have 2 examples in the book. One with an extremely successful entrepreneur who was a co-founder of one of these unicorn companies, and they sold the company. And he's an incredibly nice guy. And what he shared, and we also had a CEO of a quite admired company who shared, that was anonymous, but that both of them have worked so tremendously hard to do well in school. And that also means every time there's a course, every time there's a test, it's like ingrained in them that they want to do better than everyone else. And throughout their career, both of them have been they have very, very impressive CVs, both of them. But that both then also later on in their career experienced that something as simple as a conversation, a discussion with their subordinates, that they could often, if they came with an argumentation that was not so strong, or if people were not like following their line of thought, that they could become very insistent. And it's been huge insights for both of them that there's this competitive frenemy that is so deep in them that sometimes when they actually shouldn't compete, and this is their team, these are people who work for them, that helps them be successful, they should not compete with them, they should support them, they should encourage them, they should empower them, motivate them. that competitiveness can be a huge pitfall. What I would like you to do again is just have a look at the 7 and see which of them can you recognize first of all, and then among those, which is the strongest.
When I read your book, Nicolai, I was looking forward to reading about the convention, because I wasn't sure, prior to being exposed to them, what you meant. Would you just describe that to the audience?
Yeah, I can imagine that's actually a little bit of an odd one out now when you say so. What convention means is that in most societies, you know, if you do certain things, that then your likelihood of becoming successful in life is higher. So there's a joke in China that children can choose to be whatever they want for their parents, as long as it's lawyer or doctor. And I guess in any society, you can see that there are certain schools, certain universities, certain educations, certain entry-level jobs that are very prestigious and that are likely to take you to a good place. So that's the convention. And that's certainly a strength. And I would even say that there are a lot of people who maybe grow up in homes where their parents might not be as highly educated as they become, or have not pursued professional careers the same way as they do. And that they can have a huge handicap. So this whole thing about understanding the conventions and knowing how to play them is certainly a strength. But the flip side to that is that at some point in life, so from a professional point of view, it typically comes with a huge responsibility. And in the personal life, it often comes with the complexity of establishing a family. I mean, getting married or finding a significant other, and suddenly there are children. And then to juggle all of this gives a lot of complexity, and suddenly you cannot look up the answers anymore in a book. So that's where convention then becomes a problem, because if you try to live up to those conventions, despite you actually have a relatively complex professional and personal life, it's very difficult. So thank you, Jesper, for asking. now we have a lot of things going on here in the chat. So if I just so now it's flowing here. So we have a couple of people sharing about their frenemies. So we have boldness, we have perseverance, we have independence, flexibility, boldness, perseverance. Of course, I started talking about perseverance, so I might have been priming some of you. We also have a question, and I haven't read the question, so yes, but if it's okay, I'll throw myself into reading it and then answering afterwards. So in Denmark, there seems to be resistance against growth and achievement, which traditionally was about personal gain and climbing up the social ladder, leaving more wealth to our children than what was given to you. I still see this as a noble goal, and I see no reason why I should be ashamed of that. But the underlying drivers for me are impact and influence, which I guess is about the greater good for society. So thank you so much for that comment. And I happen to, I guess, a lot of people here are Danish, and it's also pretty detectable that my accent is Danish. So in Denmark and the rest of Scandinavia, we have a close relationship to the law of Jante, from Axel Sandemo's, the Danish Norwegian author's book. So there is clearly something about striving too much is not always socially acceptable. And I can also see it in the reception of our book in Scandinavia, and actually also internationally among some coaches, interestingly enough, that some people associate ambition with being selfish. When we wrote it, Nicolai and I, the book, we were very conscious that also the people who do good for humanity are ambitious. And now when you ask about Denmark, we had a big interview with Berlingske, which is, I can say, the biggest establishment and newspaper in Denmark. And actually the headline was, "Forget the law of Jante and look inside yourself." Because what typically are the big obstacles we see for people to really be successful, both in terms of achievement and also in terms of the balance in life. That's really these frenemies. So, Jesper?
Yeah, sorry, Nicolai, it's just, of course, I have heard bits about your history, and of course, in that regard, most of the people listening in might not know too much about you, but basically you spent most of your working life outside of Denmark and working globally, basically. So what's your experience in terms of ambitious people outside of the Danish borders? How is that perceived, in terms of how we might see it here in Denmark?
I mean, you don't need to go further than Stockholm, which is the place in the world with the highest number of, Sweden is the number, I think it's in the country with the highest number of dollar billionaires relative to the size of the population. And if you go to Stockholm, which is now closer to becoming a tech capital for at least Northern Europe, if not more than that. So there you see it being very different, even in Sweden. And of course, if you take US or you take China, I mean, I think some of these restrictions in terms of ambition not being a good thing, you might see it in low-income families or families where people where the parents haven't had long educations. That is a little bit like, please don't stick out. But in these societies, I think ambition and success is much more celebrated. But then I will also say, having been out for 16 years, that I'm really impressed about how many Porsche Cayenne on white plates are driving around in Denmark. So it seems that a lot of people are more relaxed about it in Denmark. There's more show off now than there was 16 years ago. And it's maybe also because if you look at some of the old families in Denmark that are behind some of the big industrial companies, they have been very humble, very discreet. And now you see new generations of entrepreneurs and successful people who among whom many of them are much more visible about their wealth. And again, I mean, the way we define ambition is very broad. And I think if you take a guy like Elon Musk, some of what he does is clearly, I mean, to be successful himself, and he has become very wealthy. And again, if you see some of the things he engaged in, it have an ambition level that is way beyond his own life. So I mean, ambition is very important. The world has never faced, humanity have never faced so significant challenges as we do right now. Good. We have been very well around. I think, is that okay, Jesper? Brilliant. What I would like to do now is I'd like to share an example of a tool. So in the book we have a toolbox with 4 tools in, and I think one of them is particularly important when we talk about the frenemies and how to relate, because when you can recognize the frenemies in your life, you have some awareness, but there are actually 2 very different types of awareness. So what you have here is one notion. So there's something you can call conceptual awareness, which is what we draw upon when we look at our life and say, there's this frenemy, perseverance, or whatever it is. That's a conceptual awareness, that we can see patterns in the past. And that's, of course, very important. But there's another form of awareness, which is very important in terms of how we actually behave, and that's what you can call embodied awareness. Another name for it is in the moment awareness. And it's a little bit about how aware are we in that significant moment where we get surprised and where we are challenged. How well do we know ourselves there? And the whole point here is that most of us don't know ourselves so well when we get surprised. And that also means we can repeat our own old patterns there, even though they are often very counterproductive. So I gave my personal example of working too hard despite I really love my family. I gave an example of a successful entrepreneur and a CEO who came to the realization that even in discussions among colleagues, that they could become so insistent on winning in terms of argumentation, that it was really counterproductive and scared their colleagues. And that has to do with that embodied awareness. And there's a ton of science behind this. So where it basically sits is the better we are at sensing our own emotions and our feelings. And our feelings are very closely connected with bodily sensations or somatic sensations. So it's something you can train, you can practice, but you need to work on this. So the other way around, I see it often with some of my clients that they can actually have impressive high degree of conceptual awareness, but then they keep repeating the same, eventually very counterproductive things. And they can see it in hindsight, and it's simply because they haven't worked enough on that embodied awareness. So with that said, we have come up with what we think is a relatively simple, pragmatic tool for that, and we call it the frenemy rada. So it's a little bit like a rada that you put data into it, and then based on that data, you can predict possible collisions and thereby guide your way forward to avoid those collisions. And the way you do it is, first of all, you sense, and I've already said it, I mean, the more you are aware of what is happening in your body and how you're feeling, and in particular in those heated moments, the better you can deal with what happens. And then when you get these strong sensations anyway, then what we recommend is that you first of all adapt. And the reason why that can be important is you can actually be in a very significant situation where you need to do something. Take a couple of deep breaths and really think about, is this a situation where I need to act? And it can also be, it's actually a situation where you should not act. But again, a couple of deep breaths and then think about is like, what is important to do here? And often what is the right thing to do is to act opposite your normal pattern. So if you're one of the persons who are very are naturally reacting fast, you might hold back. Or if you're a person who tend to not act, then you should really contemplate doing that. So that's that piece of it. Then come the third piece, and that's really the trick here. Take a note. Take a note on what is going on. When is this? Where are you? And with who are you? So take a note. It doesn't take more than a minute or a few minutes to just write that down, and then leave that note in your pocket or somewhere, and don't look at it for the next 3 to 24 hours. So you could look at it the morning after when you've had a good sleep, hopefully. And what is so interesting then is then you might see much clearer than you did in the moment, because we don't think very clearly when we are emotionally excited. And that's, by the way, whether it's a negative emotion or a positive emotion. That then you can ask yourself, what was actually going on here? And for ambitious people, it will typically be one of the frenemies that was in play. And you can also ask why. So in my case with perseverance, I often see this super deep assumption that I need to work really hard to make it. With others, now we talked about the convention frenemy. It can also be for others that there's this thing about following the book, do what other people expect. And that can be such a strong feeling in the moment that I'm actually in conflict with what I think other people think I should do. That's what is causing that sensation. So it's a super simple exercise. It gives, sense, adapt, note, and explore gives SANE as an abbreviation. And it's really the more you do this, you start recognizing patterns. So if I give an example of some of the thing that this has helped me see is, it's probably very obvious in hindsight that when I don't get proper sleep, when I have jet lag, luckily I haven't had jet lag for a while, though I sometimes have calls at very odd times. When I've not been eating healthy, when I'm about to be late for something, that's typically where I kind of have these incidents where I act against my conceptual awareness, where basically my embodied awareness tricks me. And the more I use this, like sense, adapt, note, and explore, the better I am at seeing in advance that, okay, today I really need to be careful, or when I'm meeting with these and these people or talk about this topic, I need to be particularly careful. So much about the tool, and that's actually what I wanted to share here. And I think if it's okay, Jesper, should we then open up for Q&A?
Yes, absolutely. Let's do that, and you can again write in the chat, and we can pose, or Nicolai can see them directly in it. But the first question that I had, Nicolai, was about you know, in your experience with working with these very ambitious people around the world, in terms of actually homing in on your own ambition versus others. How, because I experience a lot of people, you know, they look around, they might see the Porsche, you know, they look at others and then judge whether they're actually ambitious enough, or whatever. How do you have you had that discussion with people, or have you experienced more people really internalize it and figure it out themselves, or how do you see that process?
I mean, first of all, I think it's a very natural process, and I think it's part of our development as human beings. So in my own, I mean, work directly with leaders, I use a lot what is called adult development. So it's very natural that people who are around 25, 35 will be much more dominated by other people's expectations, and then some, not all, but will be able to evolve their own. And you can say our book is very inspired by that and help people, I mean, not to get all the way through, but at least to reflect on it. And I think, Jesper, when you mentioned this challenge of being very dominated by what others think success look like and what you should do, then I think you can capture it in particularly two places that we have already talked about today. So one is when you don't reflect so much on what your ambition is. So I talked about the 4 premises of ambition. So if you haven't thought so much about what your ambition is, you are much more likely to compare yourself with a lot of different people who are very successful in each their way, which is super demanding, because most of these people have probably been a little bit more focused, and by comparing so many different with so many different people, you're very likely to end up like not being as good as them. So the first thing is really, the more you contemplate what is important for you in life, and both in terms of achievement and in terms of growth and in terms of well-being, the more you can be focused, the less you are at risk of being distracted. So that's the first thing. And then again, Jesper, you asked about it before, where I see this strongly is when people have what we call the convention frenemy very present in their life, then this is typically a big dilemma they have. They can typically be very torn between what you should do and what they actually deep inside themselves know that they would like to do. And that's also a big issue in leadership, for instance, because if you try to lead the way you think others think you should lead, then it limits you, in particular when you really need to be improvising and be flexible, because often the answers is not in any book. I mean, you need to figure them out along the way as you get wiser as things evolve.
Excellent. We've got questions coming in from different sources. So,
so again, from yeah. I've already been confused once.
From Facebook, can you name some role models, publicly known leaders who embodies the principles? I know that in your book, and you mentioned a few, but would you just highlight for those who've not read the book yet?
That's a good point. It's a really difficult question, I think, because I think a lot of leaders try to look very good in the press. I mean, why not? And I'd say I've worked with some people who were very famous, and again, some of them were less, you can say, role models in reality than what they looked like publicly. And that was, of course, something also they on purpose seeked out. And on the other hand, I've met some people who are just amazing in this regard, who haven't sought the limelight the same way. So it's really like these unknown heroes. So I know I'm avoiding the question a little bit, so let me get back to it in a moment. But what we actually did when we wrote the book was we very purposefully selected people who were still like in the middle of the whole thing. So instead of picking the usual ones, Richard Branson, you have all these examples, Jack Welch, blah, 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 who are fine to their life. We only did in-depth interviews with people who are between 25 and 50, because we wanted people who were still in there when it's messy. So should I answer who are some of the leaders I see as being quite impressive? I think politics is dangerous because people's view on politics, of course, flavor who you find to be role models. But if you go into the world of business, one of the persons who recently, I think, have been quite interesting is Satya Nadella from Microsoft. So, I mean, he's obviously a very, very ambitious person. He have successfully done one of the most significant turnarounds in corporate history. If you look at where Microsoft were 6-7 years ago when he took over and where it's today. And he's also a family man. I don't know if you know his story, but one of his children have severe health issues, and he and his wife have really designed their private life around making sure that child and the rest of their children have a good life. So I think he's a good example of a person who on one hand is super ambitious, very highly achieving, but clearly also prioritize the well-being not only of himself but his family, and clearly have been on a steep growth trajectory in terms of development.
Excellent. And also in your work with leaders around the world, how often do you think you should actually revisit, go through the process of setting possibly new targets for achievements or growth or well-being? How do you see the process there? I mean, and maybe also in your work, how far out should the goals be?
Yeah, that's a super question. So what we actually think you should do is to work on multiple timelines at the same time. So now I gave an example of one tool, but the 3 other tools are all about goals actually. And the first one is really like lifetime goals, and we call it principles, and actually we use the term philosophy of ambition. So what is it that is important for you in life? And this is something you can revisit, I mean, after a half year or after 2 years or after 5 years, but we talk very, very long term. And it's not like goals in the sense, it's not like, I mean, it could be, but typically they will have a different flavor. And make the world a better place could be one, for instance. Then on the next level, it's more like, how do you actually impact your return on ambition? So your philosophy of ambition defines a little bit what good is, what do you aspire for? But then in terms of improving, there we recommend quite short-term goal, but on the other hand, only one. So we see too many people have too many goals, too long-term and too superficial. Then rather have one that is a month or maximum 3 months, and where you really work in depth on what is it I want to do? What does it look like? How can I see whether I'm making progress? What are some of the things that can block me? So here we are back to the frenemies. So we call that the immediate priority. And then we have a third goal actually, and that's a weekly deliberation. And that is, we encourage people to sit down once a week and look into the next week and say, okay, what are really my opportunities to progress on my immediate priority?
And then you mentioned the 4th tool as well, about the frenemy radar.
Yeah, and I think these 2 last tools there, sorry?
Yes, no, and the 4th tool was what you went through, the frenemy radar. Yeah. Just for the audience, yeah.
There's a question in the chat here. Do you want me to take that? Yes?
Yeah.
So did you go behind the face value of the leaders who seem to get the best return on ambition and talk to some of their staff to get a second opinion? So Yes, I mean, this is what I do in the daily. So I typically coach leaders, work with leadership teams, and also do interventions with entire organizations. And that's also why I said earlier that there are a lot of the people who from the outside look like these superstars. And when you get close, it's like, whew, they're so lucky they had a good predecessor, or they have a good team, or they have like a good product. Because when you get close to them, or also get a sense of their private life, it's clearly not as admirable as it is from the outside. And on the other hand, I mean, I have of course had or not of course, but I have had the privilege also of working with people who are truly impressive. And also when you work with their direct reports and the entire organization, you can sense he is really a special human being. Now I think I don't want to limit these people to just talk about my own book, but there are really people out there when you sit with them, they have been very reflective about their own life, what they want, how they can do what they try to do, how they work with other people, how they relate with other people. So yeah. This is very beautiful when it happens, and then of course most people I work with are trying to get there.
Excellent. Now Nicolai is showing the book there, and we're actually providing some copies. So we are drawing out in the people that are registered for this event. So we will send out some 5 books of the Return on Ambition to the people who actually are registered. So if you're not registered out there somewhere on LinkedIn, YouTube or Facebook, then send us your name and you will be in the pool of people who might get a copy free of charge. And I would just say that, you know, this is it's really a practical book, so that it has a lot of questionnaires for you to actually survey yourself, and also planning about how you approach it. So it's really a practical, excellent book for thinking about your return on ambition. That's all we will achieve for today. So hopefully get the book, ebook or whatever you're used to, or audiobook, and hopefully you got some good takeaways from today's session, or a good introduction. Thank you very much, Nicolai, also for joining us, and thank you for returning to Denmark, so we might see a lot more of you. It's been a great pleasure, and also hear some of your personal stories as well. So truly inspiring. So thank you very much for taking the time for reading the book, or writing the book, sorry, and also for joining us here today. So. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. It stopped raining here at least. So hopefully there'll be some good reflections in the rest of the afternoon, and this evening perhaps about some of the questions Nicolai posted to you already, and just start thinking about it. And then get the book and start working on those issues. Well, that's all from me, Nicolai. Thanks again, and take care.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.